Hello, everyone. Chandani here. I am very, 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 very happy and honored and ecstatic to be reunited with my dear friend and teacher, Mark Whitwell, who's a renowned yoga master, author, world-renowned activist in the teaching and lineage of the Krishnamacharya lineage from India. And I'm going to have him speak a little bit about that, about his legacy in the world of consciousness, yoga, activism, study of humanity, who we are as a society, who we are as individuals, and the evolution of how yoga has impacted the world from when he was a young man to who he is today, and what his insight and feelings are about who we should be and how we should be living in the world today to make as much of a significant impact as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark Whitwell and have him introduce himself. Mark.
Thank you, Chandani. And I just want to put it right back on you. We've known each other for a few decades now. I don't know how many, but like maybe 2. Yeah.
You're making us sound ancient, Mr. Whitwell.
We're the ones who are alive. We're the yogis that are alive. Our teachers died and we're here. And we're here in the face of these pandemics that are upon us. And I always admired you so much, Chandani, as a mother, as a yogini, as a hard worker for yoga. And I just want to tell you, clearly the words of my teacher, who would take one look at you and say, Chandani, you are the hope of humanity, because you're a bridge for humanity. Your ancestry is from Vedic times. You are from the East. Your ethnicity is multi. Your nationalism is multi. And you're a bridge of the ancient world to this modern world. And that's what you embody. That's who you are. You're the hope of humanity. And you're doing this work of bringing forth in this way that we have it available to us by, light transmitted through glass tubes around the world, the transmission of light. And that's what you are doing. And I just thank you so much for doing that, for being a bridge and a hope of humanity, a bridge of modern times, the ancient world in modern times, the ancient wisdom, a bridge of ethnicities, a bridge of nationalists, identity. I mean, really, I'm grateful to you, who you are. I mean, your people, let me say this too. There was this madcap king, a crazy king, and he traveled out from Europe, got to India, and he completely destroyed your people, completely, including all the sacred texts, all the art, all the music, all the poetry. Gone, this Alexander the Great. And how your people picked yourself up through that devastation and carried on and grew as a culture, into Iran and beyond, like heavens. How did you do that? How did you survive that? But you did, and look, and you are their daughter. You stand on the shoulders of great people from an ancient world. And it's in your DNA, this wisdom of Veda, and you don't hold back.
I'm quite blown away, actually.
Please be blown away, because I'm not just saying these words. I mean, you touched me years ago in your motherhood and your, raising a young family in the middle of Sodom and Gomorrah, in the middle of LA. And I want to say too that, we were obviously protected through those naive years. Really the shit had not yet hit the fan. It's now hit the fan, and we're in the middle of dreadful pandemics. I mean, the two obvious ones, the pandemic of racism and the pandemic of this virus. And we are in hard times. And it was simply waiting there. We couldn't have dreamt this up. We didn't know it would happen, but it had to happen. We had to have this revelation of, European colonialism and its destruction of indigenous cultures, and dreadful 400 years of violence on indigenous people. And it's it's come to a head at the synchronistic time of the public health fears that we're in. And I think it's no accident that these pandemics go together. And you're called to me personally, but you're called to the world saying, okay, what do we do? What's our response to this? And I'm saying that in those decades, where we could perhaps travel to India and hang upasana, sit closely in the shine of our teachers, was something that was granted to us, a privilege that we had then because of the freedoms that our forefathers and foremothers had created in, giving us a world free of fascism. I mean, that was another time not so long ago where this, terrible ancient darkness had descended on humanity through the world wars, 1 and 2. But the hard work of our ancestors gave us a certain freedom where we could go and sit close to the ancient wisdom of this world that your people are from, that your people suffered. And we got it, we, in our naivety, not knowing what was to happen, we did get it. We're very grateful for our teachers who transmitted the wisdom traditions to us. And I am just quite certain in my life, and my friends who I hang with, is that this is the response for humanity now in the midst of the pandemics that we're battling. And that is the wisdom of our ancient people, what I call the pre-doctrinal wisdom, before humanity created tribalism, one against the other, racism, one against the other. It was all made up. Religion, one against the other. It was all made up in a few hundred years of European colonialism. And I see as the only way now is to actually make available and popularize the actual wisdoms before humanity, invented power structure of patriarchy and control and manipulation of one people over another or one person over another. Now, I just, the other pandemic we've got on our hands is that, this world is ungovernable. The US does not have a government. It doesn't have a process of intelligent, even scientific response to the pandemics of virus and racism. It doesn't. And we're in a little loopy time here where, it's like, what, what to do? We're used to there being, at least an intelligent leader doing their best. with science and logic and goodwill. We're used to that, at least that idea, and we don't have that now. So your response as a, as an ancient queen in taking manifestation this lifetime in California during this pandemic, and my response, and friends all over this world, our response is like, okay, please let us actualize the wisdom traditions that the treasured cultures of our ancient people came up with, that we love so much, that we've looked into in the last few decades in the naivety of, not really, the bubble hadn't burst yet. And now let us take that into our world for everybody, including the people who have not yet had the advantage of getting this information in the US and everywhere else on Mother Earth. That's our job now. And that's what you're doing. And thank you for holding my hand in this endeavor.
Well, Master Whitwell, I'm humbled and quite flattered, really. I've never had, I don't think, anyone invoke any sort of acknowledgement in such noble fashion towards myself or my lineage. So I appreciate and humbly receive your love and generosity with your expression. And I want to also bring it back to the center and the core of who you are and what your practice is about. And it is in the name of your teaching, the heart of yoga. And for people who don't know, yoga simply means union and cohesion, and in any form, in any shape, in any way. And so bringing it back to you personally, I just wanted you to reflect back on what was the impulse when you were a young man living in the 60s or 70s, whenever that was. When was it that you were initiated by this remembrance of a deep calling of union, a deep calling of longing to understand and search for that which has possibly been taken from you, or that which you had forgotten? What was the story around that, and how did this voyage, this odyssey, initiate for you?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, as I said, my father was in the army, and he did his part to protect our Western democracies and see that they came through as democracies in the threat of fascism in Europe. And that's what our forefathers and foremothers did for us. And they gave us a certain naive kind of freedom in the West. And if you had $5 in your pocket, you could go to India and sit with extraordinary people that were there alive through the World I and II's, Ramana Maharishi, Neem Karoli Baba, Ananda Maima, Bhagavan Nityananda, to name a few off the top of my head, but there were many, and there's the most sublime realization of a human life was like tangibly embodied in these great people, And the thing that moved me was, that got me going, I have to admit, were the great Beatles, the great George Harrison and the great John Lennon, including Paul and Ringo. But it was particularly the first two I mentioned who died, who declared their personal spiritual interests while they were the most famous people on planet Earth doing an extraordinary thing for this planet. I mean, where would we be today without the Beatles? But without Elvis, and without Little Richard, and without Robert Johnson, without Bob Dylan, etc., 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 many, Prince, many to be named, who essentially like saw the light and said, fuck, enough is enough, you know, I'm living my life, and expressed it at least artistically. And me as a 15-year-old boy in the suburbs of the middle class downtown usual life, the best that my parents could come up with after the wars, basically, you know, the Beatles arrived and there was this explosion of consciousness. And the next thing I heard about that they were in India studying meditation with the Mahesh Yogi. And that was extremely interesting to me in Rishikesh. So off I went. I just like, I wasn't prepared to spend, you know, like a decade of study at university for the factories or for the universities, for the, you know, productive cogs of scientific materialism. It wasn't good enough for me. And I thank God for George Harrison and John Lennon, who took me to India. I met Paul McCartney, by the way, and I, you know, just a few years back, Paul, thank you so much. You know, you guys single-handedly leveled the playing field and you ended the hierarchies, and at least you showed that they could be ended. You showed that it was okay to be a working class hero. You showed that it was everything to be an ordinary person. It is everything. They showed it, at least artistically. And he was very humble, saying, well, I see what you mean. He gave me a big hug at that point because he did see what I was saying. And he said, but mind you, we didn't set about our lives with that thought in mind. You know, he's very humble, very lovely man, who I admire to this day. But they did reveal something, and they put us on an inquiry into absorbing these wisdom traditions of humanity. These the greatest treasures, in my view, that human culture has come up with is spiritual wisdom that come from Veda, and the other part of the world from Kabbalah, from Hebrew culture. They are synchronistically appearing and both profound. And the practices within those, which is yoga, that as it was defined in the Upanishad traditions, the texts of yoga from Upanishads. And that's about the time when your people were destroyed by Alexander the Great, that fucking idiot. What did he think he was doing? You know, what gave these people some sort of God-given right that they thought they had to go and destroy other people? You know, how did that insanity occur? And because they had steel weaponry, they thought they could do it, you know. And they did do it. And they had destroyed my indigenous brothers and sisters from Aotearoa, New Zealand, you know. And they did this and they did that, and they did slavery on the US and everything that they did, you know. Total insanity. And all the while we had these profound traditions that were clearly stating over and over again, and the great statements and the great mantras, you know, is that we are life on earth. We are one people. You know, we are all the power of the cosmos. The cosmos is arising as power and pure intelligence in every person's case, in every creature's case, in every form. Is the power of the cosmos, is pure intelligence, is unspeakable beauty, the appearance of anything. And everything is in perfect harmony with everything else, is the nature of reality itself, is life as it is, you know, reality as it is, and you are that, and I am that, and every single person is that.
So where does the where does the dichotomy, where does that occur? How does that occur? Because if we look back at the lineage of our humanity, it's been savagery amidst the knowingness of Purusha, of oneness, of wholeness, of cohesion, of yoga, of unity. It's been parallel, just like it has been in the Vedas, right? With the tales and the stories. Yeah. So with this dichotomy, and as we've lived through the ages, what we've seen and learned and heard and experienced, and then winding it now into today with the global health pandemic, the racial pandemic, the suffering in the world on so many different grotesque ego levels. Where are we? Are we just still rotating through the same scenario, or are we ascending? Is there hope? How do we arise out of this for the sake of our own humanity and the sake of our children? How do you define this moment for us right now?
It's mixed in with the pandemics of forced diet, terrible diet that's forced on the entire world population, including the US. The pandemics of diabetes and obesity. They're slow burning pandemics that have been on us for many generations now. And the dreadful pandemic of sexism and ageism, attractivism, the media models of what is attractive in a human life, and our obsession around those ideas that men and women suffer so badly, And I'm saying it is all driven from an original insane impulse of a certain dominant culture of Europe, because it developed the mechanism of metal and weaponry. They could go out there and dominate everybody else and destroy everything in its path. And this humanity's obsession with knowledge, you have to know everything in order to control everything. And mankind, humankind just tries to control everything and therefore kills everything in its path. And that's what, this egoic life is what we are in the midst of, this very dark time where everything is destroyed and literally actually destroyed. And we face that possibility as a human species of ending our own, of ending the relational ecologies of Mother Nature that we depend upon, that we live in, the what I call the intrinsic harmonies of Mother Nature. That is this body's actual condition. This body is in a complete harmony with air and light and water and the green realm. And it's in complete harmony with male, female, that created my mother, father, the nurturing power of life, that created one cell that was me, from which my whole chakra system, spine grew and my head appeared in 3 days, from that great union of male, female, which is the substance of reality itself, that is the nurturing substance of all life on earth, whether it's the animal or the plant kingdom. Even atoms, even a rock, atoms are, two poles in union, And that is our situation. And that has been killed, ignored. And what we delivered into this world was this system of knowledge and control and manipulation of Mother Nature. No collaboration with Mother Nature, but the plundering of Mother Nature for greedy resource of fearful men and women now, but men led the way, and they destroyed this planet. And we live in the threat of destroying our own nest. So that's how that happened. it's like just a great fault of culture. We all started off in Africa. We were all brown and black, all of us. And then some peoples drifted north into the cold climates and they lost their pigmentation. And even so, for thousands and thousands of years, there was no concept of race. Even in England and around the time of William Shakespeare and that the English people hadn't even invented the idea of race. It came later, with the money, the slavery, the exploitation of one people over another because they could do that because they had weaponry. And then they invented the concept of race to justify what their fearful wealth generation was, this whole fearful obsession with wealth. And you see that going on today. I mean, it's completely vulgar how the stock markets continue to, the gambling of a few 1% of the population gambling on the stock market. And this wealth inequity continues, We made the people poor. This dominant sector had to protect itself by violent policing and prisons to protect that illegally gained wealth. I heard in the time of Lincoln, they had proposed actually to give land to the freed slaves, to actually give them land and let them have their life. They'd already been there for like 150 years or 200 years. I'm sorry, I don't know my history, but they were freed. But then Lincoln got killed, and the next president came out, Andrew Jackson came along, and he was a white Southerner, white superior person, or thought he was, and he abolished that scheme. It never happened. And what I see it must happen is that there must be reparation for this fault of European colonialism that destroyed our world. Not just through racism, but through every other kind of commerce, every other exploitation that happened. They destroyed our world. And the only way is to actually morally, legally, and financially address that. It's the only way. And some countries have done that in their colonialism. Their violence has been addressed, a little in South Africa, a little in New Zealand, some attempts, and it's brought a level of peace to the whole of the populations of those countries, a sense of cooperation and at least the beginnings of the end of racism, the beginnings of it, and a pride in each other's cross-cultural lives. New Zealand, white New Zealand has a certain sort of pride in what is indigenous culture of New Zealand, and they're educated in that. The language flourishes. The colonial policies of England ran out around the 1840s, and the British armies couldn't kill the Africans in Swahili land, and they couldn't kill the indigenous people of New Zealand any longer after 30 years attempting to do that. And so what they did is they signed a treaty. It's called the Treaty of Waitangi. And it assured the rights, the human rights of the indigenous people there, their land rights, their fishing rights. It's not perfect because there was a lot of bad shit happened after that. But at least it was a legal and financial structure that to this day, the law of that land is implementing to wrong the grievances, correct the wrongs, correct the grievances of those peoples. And it's been an early start and something of a model of what can be done, that we must correct the colonial abuse that was imposed on people all over this world. It must be addressed. If we don't address it, we're all gone. We're all out of here. No amount of charity will work. You know?
It's interesting you say this about reparations and how New Zealand addressed that with the Maoris, and, you know, South Africa with apartheid, and there was some sort of resurrection of resolution that came to the table with people like Nelson Mandela. And I'm not sure the history of New Zealand, but like you said, how that came about. As I look at American society today, and coming from this sort of multicultural background, Western and Eastern, but brought up in the West, predominantly in England and then in America, and now living here, when I look at the world economy, because it seems like we're in an economy-based culture. I mean, the culture has now become an economy-based culture, and the driving force is only monetary.
Yeah.
With sort of the fundamental aspect of that being just the necessity to survive and eat,
yeah,
and live and breathe, because of the control and the dominance of the natural resources of the planet across borders.
yeah,
I don't know if you're aware of this, but Lebanon right now is facing a famine for the first time since the 40s, when they had something horrific happen for them politically and culturally in their country. Now, because of the health pandemic and because of the political crisis in Lebanon, in the Middle East, they are facing famine for the first time. And so there are devastating situations occurring in front of our eyes, under our nose today, in India, in the Middle East, and here in America. So I see that the dominance of this global economic power, which is centralized now in the select few European countries and governed by America, I don't want to sound fatalistic at all, but I don't see any sort of justice emerging quite effortlessly due to these pandemics. I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and we're about to actually go into a lot more hot water before we can actually readdress morally, resource-wise, and economically what we're facing today as a global unity.
Well, look, it hasn't been seen yet as a public momentum, but it is there. There are certain, minor public personalities. I said this, when Mr. Floyd's death occurred, that dreadful, vulgar experience that we had, to see it, and I always say, thank God for Steve Jobs and for putting cameras into phones. It was a good move. Yeah. There was a democratizing information, sharing it among the people, and it's fucking, whacked us in our face. There was no going back after that. And I said, look, give 3% of wealth now, all, personal wealth, government wealth, corporate wealth, the music industry wealth, built on black musicians who were the originators of prior to Elvis and all of that. What's happened to the wealth of Elvis Presley, for example? Like, take 3% of that and give it now as reparation. And then I've been very happy to see a few public figures get up and speak on this. There's the need for reparation, and the few examples we have in the world where that has successfully occurred, with deep government apologies to Indigenous people and financial reparation and legal reparation, is at least a start that must happen. And then I was very pleased that the gentleman from Wilco, that great musician, came forth and he said, I'm giving 5% of my publishing royalties right now back to Black musicians who were the originators of what I do. Without them, I couldn't do what I'm doing. You know, and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a little minor story on this, but it's all there, and we can do it and we must do it. And when we do it, you know, see, what's happened is that all the false hopes that our civilization has been built upon, you know, white colonialism that built our modern time civilization all over this world, including Asia. The hopeful promises have been turned out to be shallow and fraudulent, you know, except for the people who are still trading equities on the stock market. And it's a completely delusory economy. It's not built on anything. You know, if you don't support Main Street, then Wall Street's going to disappear too. You know, and that money coming, if we all gave 5% of our wealth back onto Main Street and back into the poor, we wouldn't have to police them and imprison them to control our greedy wealth, our fearful wealth. It would, you know, it would be a thing of the past. And I see that there is some movement of this idea, you know, in the atmosphere. And we just have to, you know, these pandemics have just begun. And now we have to get real about our solution. So this is a very strongly held point of view that I have and my friends have and that you have. And, you know, it's like Alexander the Great, you know, hey, buddy, fuck you. Like, you know, make a gesture, make a serious gesture for what you did out there to that beautiful ancient religion. Get real, Mr. Alexander, whatever his name is. But listen, Chandani, I'm also saying in the midst of this, whatever happens and what, you know, however quickly it happens or doesn't happen, you know, we know what must happen in the public systems. All this hope, the hope of politicians, the hope of religion, the hope of economy, you know, the hope of oil and coal, it's just messed us all up. All of it has messed up humanity. Colonialism was inspired by religious sanctioned, you know, ideas of owning God, you know, own God, you kill God. You know, you give yourself to God. That's all you can do. God is prior. So however long it takes for our systems to start functioning with the ecologies of Mother Nature. In the meantime, I'm saying you and I and everybody listening here, do your yoga. Yoga was in the Upanishads and the Vedas, it was the practical means to actualize the mysteries of Veda, to actualize it in your own life. Yoga is your direct embrace of life as it is, reality as it is. That is power, unspeakable beauty, that is you and me in all forms. Everything in the natural world, unspeakable beauty. It's the one thing you can depend upon. You know, the intrinsic harmonies by which Mother Nature is functioning, how this body is functioning in and as Mother Nature. And yoga is the participation in that fact. And I'm saying, while we wait for Rome to burn and renew whatever has to happen, I'm saying this is the intelligent response for all of us to make in the midst of these pandemics. You know, and that is the individualization, you know, adapting yoga to the individual, the individualization of yogic practice according to each person's body type, age, and health, and cultural background and capacity. You do your yoga that's right for you. That is your direct embrace of reality as it is, of life as it is. Do your yoga. And there's the side matters of, like, you completely empty the lung, and then you completely fill the lung. You empty what is full and then fill what is empty. You release what is old to receive what is new. It's very healing on the system. It's very good for your immunity. It's a very good practical response in the middle of the virus pandemic and all pandemics, because it places you in life as you actually are. See, and then it empowers you to then make your stand and engage your point of view, make the social changes that in your heart and soul must be made. But it is the most fundamental response, in the view of my teachers, like, do your yoga. Embrace life as it is in the midst of difficulties. And the difficulties are all around us, and they're not going to go. They'll still be there tomorrow morning. They'll still be there in a year or 2 or 10 if we don't get busy. So that's what, my bottom line is, thank you for stating that in your sort of title of this dialogue here, is like, what to do in the midst of.
The common denominator to resolve all ailments and suffering in the world is to come back to the single unit first. None of us can bypass that. And I think that's the essential teaching of yoga, that it peels off the layers of everything to the one single common denominator, which is coming back to the root of where all of this begins, which is just the nature of the inhale and the exhale that gives us life. So to be reminded of that and to come back to that and to have that be the pulse of everything else before we can do anything else is probably one of the most urgent calls of action we have at our disposal today. And it's accessible for all of us.
Yeah. It was said in the Upanishads in Bhagavad Gita by Krishna to Arjuna 5,000 years ago. He said Arjuna didn't want to do his life. He was very afraid. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in life. And Krishna said, oh, Arjuna, sacrifice the inhale to the exhale. Sacrifice the exhale to the inhale. Be a yogi, oh Arjuna. And the other beautiful things he said about take the action of no action, or act without the need for immediate result. Act because it is good to act. We must act. We must take a stand, We must know where we stand on these matters and take action. And so all of that is there, for us to, that great text on yoga, and it's as meaningful today and more meaningful today than it ever was. Take action, this sacrifice the inhale to the exhale and vice versa. And that, of course, means give the inhale to the exhale, and which equates to male-female strength that is utterly receptive to make that gesture of sacrifice, of giving, whether that's same-sex intimacy or opposite-sex intimacy or any gender identification or none at all. The substance of reality is opposites in union. And this is to return to what is most primal in our life, what life is. But as I say, it fuels us then to make the political, social changes that need to be made and to speak. to act and be heard. So I think that these wisdom traditions that came to us via Krishnamacharya, the teacher of the teachers, the grandfather, the teacher of Mr. Iyengar and the teacher of Mr. Joyce, these popular systems of yoga, they all need these principles of Krishnamacharya that he brought forth. Sadly, he was ignored as they turned yoga into another patriarchal commodity, a money-making, ego-driven, more of the same nonsense of the rest of the world. They turn yoga into that. Either, religious hopefulness or gymnastic hopefulness there's nothing there, We have to go back to the tradition that flourished all over Asia from the 5th to the 14th century. It was yoga, and it became absorbed by all religious traditions in that ancient world. And then from the 14th century, it got eliminated by male orthodoxy, by power structures. The invention of the perfect person who's in control as if everybody else is not perfect. See, my teacher said humanity is doomed in that model of the perfect person. We are all perfect. We are all Mother Nature. We are all God's creatures. We're all God's children, to use some beautiful poetry. And this yoga is each person's direct embrace of God, not a looking for God, not an owning God, not using the God idea to exploit one person over another. But the yogas of free participation in the given reality is what Krishnamacharya brought forth from those forgotten wisdom cultures. It was suppressed, and it was almost invisible to humanity. It was like pushed into hermitage in Tibet, near Lake Manasarovar in Kailash, and it wasn't there for anybody for centuries. And Krishnamacharya was a great scholar born into a family of Vedanta scholars, and he 11 years in Varanasi, but he still couldn't find yoga. And his own 10th century guru, Ramanuja, said there must be yoga to realize Advait, the non-dual state, to realize God. There must be yoga. It was a pronouncement from Ramanuja Acharya, who was like avataric appearance. And there must be male-female collaboration as equals and opposites, where one empowers the other, in an endless exchange. This was clear statements from that culture. And Krishnamacharya, in his young life, he said it had vanished out of India. It wasn't there. And so he went to Tibet, and he spent 7.5 years there, and he got it. And at the behest of his guru, Rama Mohan Brahmachari, he went back into South India with this mission from his gurus and from Ramanuja. It's like, bring this to the whole world, to all the people. Make sure it is not confused with Hinduism. It's for all people, all cultures, as the practical means for all people to actualize their own ideals of culture. And he did his best. But then it got waylaid as they turned yoga into gymnastics and fashion and Hindu, religious obsession. But the great king of the Maharaja Mysore, Wadiyar Krishnaraj IV, he said, okay, I need yoga. My family need yoga. My people need yoga. And he became the patron and the student of Krishnamacharya. And I uphold him as a great model of leadership. Yeah, our leaders must see that each person is allowed to be intimate with life as it is, and they're allowed to be resourced. No more inequity of wealth, the fearful bullshit that colonization and patriarchal religion created. So that's why I stand for this, you know. And
we have to stand for it.
Yeah.
We don't have any other choice.
Yeah. It's a practical response to the pandemics. It's not head in the sand spirituality. It is to embrace the real, yoga is intimacy with all tangible conditions. The body and the body's relatedness to its own experience, complete embrace of all ordinary relational conditions, the seen realm and the unseen realm, that embrace. And it was worked out in, as I say, this treasure of human culture from, it's thousands of years old now. It was like ancient shamanic evolved, and then it got codified in sacred texts from the 5th to the 14th century, and then obliterated again. And, we've got to look beyond this fault of colonialism and the fault of Western commerce, the fault of exploiting the resources of the earth. And now even some mad people are talking about let's leave Earth and go to Mars or something stupid, because they can't do it here. They want to kill everything. So to return to, real human culture, real cooperative living. The thing I'd like to, finally add to this, I'm living in Polynesian people and brown culture, and they've also suffered the pandemic. And it's been very interesting to see them get organized around living cooperatively and growing local food. And they're bringing forth their ancient healing practices with each other. And, these indigenous people who weren't quite destroyed by Europe, still surviving in their cultural dignity, and they are, it's beautiful to see them respond collectively in the midst of these pandemics that they have on them. So we can do this. We can do this. We can do this in the US. We can do it in Britain, we can do it everywhere around this world, is to be intimate with life as it is, reality as it is, each other as we are, Humanity has been so aggressive for so long. So I see, we can do this and we will do this. It's the only way out of this. And humanity has been through many pandemics from primordial history to the present time. We've come through, we will come through this, but we have no choice but to give up the false hopefulness we've had in politics and religion and economies, and start living cooperatively with each other.
I think that's the greatest hope. That's the greatest hope of our time. And it is the light that burns very brightly. And maybe for the first time in the history of man, this torch of light, of hope, of true unity globally is burning very brightly and very warmly. And I want to thank you for coming on and acknowledging that and allowing us to recognize that. And these conversations are so important. These connections are so important. And it's my absolute honor and privilege to have shared this valuable time with you. And we honor you, your work in the world. You're one of our pioneers, our teachers. We love you, and just keep holding that torch high up so that we can keep on moving towards it. Thank you so much, Mark Whitwell. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, I'll leave your links, and I'm going to come and visit you in Fiji before you leave Fiji one of these days.
Yeah, you do that. Yeah, do that. And heartofyoga.com, and this book that we put out, God and Sex, Now We Get Both, is a profound philosophical statement that, in my view, is the book of our time. We need to understand the messaging in there.
Where can we get that book?
Amazon.
Okay, great.
God and Sex, subtitled Now We Get Both.
I love it. You are just such the rebel child still, and I love you for it.
ordinary statement.
It
It's an ordinary and necessary statement to understand that statement. And you just, as you heard the words and you laughed because you get it, well, of course. There's separating these ideas as different cultural phenomena has vulgarized both and made both useless. And we bring them together, one empowers the other and makes both very, very useful.
Is it based on Tantra too, or is it just your revision?
Like I said, essentially the yoga that got obliterated after the 14th century. It's placing that back into center stage of a human life. And there's nothing obsessive in that. It's just ordinary practice adapted to each individual needs that gives whole body intimacy with reality as it is, life as it is. As I am saying, all of life is the union of opposites by which the source of both are revealed. And that is what life is. You as a mother know that, you know.
So beautiful, so beautiful. Yeah. I can't wait to read it.
Please do.
I'm going to order it tonight.
Please do and pass it on.
I will. I'll read it and then I'll give it to someone.
And then this other vehicle that we have is this immersion course on the heartofyoga.com of how anybody can get the principles of practice adapted to their needs and do a daily non-obsessive, easy practice. And the whole thing is predicated on that idea. This whole conversation is predicated like, do your yoga, not anybody's yoga, your yoga that's right for you. And the principles that came through Krishnamacharya and his brilliant son, Desikachar, that I received and put in a book called The Heart of Yoga. And they're there in this little course, easy course. And I'm very happy with it because we've given it by donation and we've got people all over the world, including people from poor countries, you know, from Africa and the Americas and all over, doing this course for $1. And I'm very happy, and I do, like you, it's the hope for humanity. And really, Chandani, thank you for your culture surviving Alexander the Great and giving him the fingers and moving on. And thank you for being the great grandchild of that beautiful wisdom culture and standing strong for it forevermore.
And thank you for being my favorite Kiwi in the whole world. I love you so much.
No, but you haven't met our Jacinda Ardern. Like, what about her? Now, she's a model.
Yeah, that's true.
She's the model for world leadership, you see.
She's amazing.
And she champions this, you know, the rights of the poor in New Zealand. She does her best, let me put it that way, you know.
The Kiwis are the best.
Well,
they win the Gold Cup right now.
Well, she is a woman. Okay, that's her first. She's a woman. And she's a leader who uses her science, you know, uses the head and logic from the heart. And my line about Jacinda Ardern is that she's the heart of state. She's not the head of state. Yeah, so we have a heart of state, you see. Now, the US is going to get one soon. It's got to happen. The heart of state uses science for the purpose of the heart. This is the mind for the purpose of the heart. The mind is, in yoga, you see, the mind is literally arising as a function of the heart. Without the heart, without life, there is no mind. And mind dissociated has created this vulgarity of the human situation. You know, it's destroyed the human life. But when we rest in the heart and the compassion that is the heart, kindness principle that woman leader has, then she uses the head for the heart's purpose, for the purpose of compassion. We use science for the purpose of compassion. And then things improve. So thanks for reminding me of that wonderful woman. And I say, you know, Jacinda Ardern for world leader. That's what I will put that forth. Like her, but also, of course, men like her too.
Yes, men like you and women like her will be in good shape, Mr. Whitwell.
Thank you so much.
I love you so much. Thank you for this time with me today.
Yeah. We'll talk again soon.
We'll talk very soon.